Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Okay, and hello. Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am the host that you hear every good Monday, Ethan. So, what's up, everybody? How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing a good day. Everybody's doing a good day. I hope everyone's having a good day. Hope everybody's doing fine, and I hope everybody's staying safe and keeping up, with their life. Everybody's doing good. Everybody is trying to get by in a time where, it's difficult to look at the bright side, but you still have to. It's the best way to keep yourself sane. It's the best way to keep me sane is look at the bright side. And on the bright side, we have 4 good segments to talk about today in this podcast that I think people will enjoy hearing and being informed upon. Some of the news is not great. Michigan State fans, it's not going to be the greatest news. Rutgers fans, it's not going to be the greatest news. But maybe if you are a fan of the ACC, maybe something catches your eye. And we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different stuff when it comes to what Notre Dame's plan could be, as we don't know anything official yet. We're going to be talking about running backs, my favorite position in football. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff. So first and foremost, we do have to get rid of the more disappointing parts of today's podcast. And that is more contact tracing problems that are scaling through college football day by day, week by week. And its latest victim is Michigan State. So Michigan State was the latest team, kinda, not really, but they announced Friday that his entire team will quarantine for 2 weeks following a recent round of testing amid the COVID pandemic. So Michigan State had maybe 1 or 2 people that tested positive who have really high risk contact or high levels of contact with probably most of the players and coaching staff around. So I would have to assume it was either a trainer or some sort of coach or some sort of medical professional that's been around a lot of people on the staff. And the biggest thing about COVID-19, college football, sports in general, isn't necessarily testing, right? It isn't necessarily the fact that, you're doing a lot of traveling, that you're not doing social distancing rules, you're going to different places. The biggest problems that people face when you are dealing with COVID-19 is the fact that there's contact tracing, right? Because you don't know where someone is going to get it. That's something that you can't really predict. But when someone does get it and they're important to your team, and they might be around your team for a long time, for a long extended amount of time, that does affect a lot of things. So if an offensive lineman were to get COVID-19, you have to quarantine the whole offensive line. You have to quarantine the whole offensive line and the quarterback probably. And then it starts to get even further. So then you have to quarantine basically the whole offense if everybody touches the ball at least once throughout a whole practice session. And that can get quite problematic. So, just a few hours after Michigan State let loose the news, the NCAA hosted its weekly question and answer segment on Twitter with Brian Hanline and the first medical officer of the NCAA. The segment was kind of bleak and not very promising. Hanline said the testing around the nation continues to be delayed. Turnaround times for results can be extended for a week, which is a significant issue for college football teams that must during the season. So they must get testing and get results back within 72 hours. So he's not expecting a vaccine anytime soon either. And we're saying, let's be realistic. He told host Andy Katz, about 500 viewers as well, you know, we got to plan well into 2021, and that's without a vaccine. And expecting that by the end of the year or beginning of 2021 that there be one doesn't seem realistic. So the hurdles that remain in college sports and college football, not only a 14-day quarantine for positive contacts, basically are going to be a real issue. And it's always going to be problematic until we get a vaccine and until we have proper social distancing, I guess, requirements, regulations. Not to say that the NCAA's current rules aren't sufficient. They're definitely a good starting place, but there's really no telling how you're going to do this. It gets tougher and tougher to look at it from a football perspective, how people travel, how people go about living their life, to think that this is going to be smooth without a hitch, right? And the NBA, credit to them, they've done something that probably no one would have predicted that would work out the way it's working out right now. And this is 130-something pages worth of the bubble getting ready to go. People are zero positive tests for the first few weeks. It's a miracle, really. It's amazing what the NBA is doing, and they're trying their hardest to make this work. But let's keep in mind, the NBA didn't have to start a full new season worth of playing. They didn't have to do that at all. They only had to do a few months. So in reality, they kind of didn't have to think full on into the whole spectrum of a full 82 game season, in which it wouldn't have been played 82 games. It would have definitely been reduced. And we don't know how long they can last doing this. We know that the NBA has been looking into making another bubble in Chicago for like teams that didn't make the playoffs or the playoff bracket system, you know, the threshold. But at the end of the day, those teams, like, they have to do this because they can't have those teams be at a severe disadvantage of not playing organized basketball with their teams, coaching staff and medical staff, training facilities, all that, for months on end. Like, we got to remember, some of these teams are ongoing, not playing organized team basketball since March. It is almost the end of July, basically August. That's a long time. That is an extreme long time. It's basically 5 months without playing organized basketball with your team. That is a extreme amount of long time. You can't have these dudes basically play almost half a year to then some without playing organized sports, organized basketball, while everybody else basically got a little bit of a training camp and a extended amount of time to play. So it's very tough to see how teams and players and sports organizations are going to figure out how to make this work in a full season. That's why in the NBA, a lot of people think that after this, the NBA is probably going to have to take an extended break for a while. They're going to be delayed in coming back for the next season and probably have to start way later, maybe even Christmas or something like that, just to see where they're at, just because there's no way you come back in the middle of the predicted second wave that everybody's talking about. And there's no telling how a bubble system, if they bring it back, is going to work for a full season. So bringing this back to football real quick, because this is a college football podcast, how in the world are we going to look at how players travel across the country and immediately think that without extreme levels of requirements and regulations, that this is going to work out in the best favor of everybody involved. You know, Donna Shalala is a Washington, D.C. politician, and she's a former president of two football playing juggernauts in Miami and Wisconsin. So she understands football. She knows what she's doing. And specifically, she understands the obstacle presented by contact tracing, which we're talking about. So that requires athletes to quarantine for a majority of 14 days. And if they are contacted by a person who tested positive, like for instance, hitting one in practice or flying on a plane together, things can get hairy. So she asked, have you ever been on an airplane with a football player? And she asked this to a House representative from South Florida. Like, they're big guys sometimes. They leave in the middle seat open. They're not 6 feet apart from anyone and from one another. So it gets to the point where I, as in Shalala, wouldn't be surprised if they shifted all athletics to the spring, which keeps on coming up and up more and more in conversation as she continues that who still often communicates with high-ranking authorities in college football athletics. The reason is not simply the spread of disease, but one of the things that no one is writing about is contact tracing. And she says if somebody on your offensive line gets affected, you have to isolate the entire offensive line for 14 days. And that's not counting if they've practiced. So then you got a whole bunch of things going in to one another. So she gave that quote more than a week ago in an interview, and it's kind of like she was a prophet on this. So now, after a week, Michigan State announced to their entire team, every single player had to be quarantined for 2 weeks, 14 days, and the most recent round of tests revealed a positive for a second member of its staff. So the Spartans became at least the 12th FBS team this summer to suspend workouts because of either community or campus outbreak, and they become the first to publicly announce a full team quarantine, but they may not be the last. And they definitely were not the last, because Rutgers also had to quarantine their football program following 10 positive tests as well yesterday. And I mean yesterday, I mean as in Saturday. Rutgers placed their entire football team under quarantine after 6 players received positive COVID-19 tests, and the school announced Saturday 4 other members of the program also tested positive since mid-June, when the team resumed off-season workouts. So a statement from the spokesperson of Rutgers said, "We have paused all in-person team activities, quarantined our entire program, and will work diligently with Rutgers medical experts and state and local officials to determine the next steps." So we all know the announcement came literally a day after Michigan State announced that they would have to quarantine for 14 days. And after it had received 8 positive tests since mid-June, there have been 13 teams to suspend workouts because of either a community or campus outbreak. So Power 5 schools' in-season health plans recommend a 14-day quarantine period in the event that someone has been in contact with another person who has COVID-19. And these high-risk contacts describe situations in which someone is within 6 feet of an infected person for at least 15 minutes, while one or both parties are not wearing a mask. And the biggest thing about this is the fact that we are getting to the point where teams are about to get ready to practice and get inside the nitty-gritty. And that starts, August 7th? So it's not going to be really great for teams that need to start camp. So let's keep this in mind. The Spartans are in a real predicament now. So Friday was the beginning of NCAA's new preseason 6-week plan, 2 weeks of enhanced training that includes walkthroughs, and 4 weeks of camp that starts August 7th. So every other program around the nation are beginning to start their extensive work this summer, and the Spartans are locked down. The Michigan State will be held behind by this whole virus, and they'll be behind others, and players may need to reacclimate themselves when returning August 7th at the earliest. So we don't even know if they return on time. The earliest that we know is August 7th. So while other squads are gearing up for easy transition from walkthroughs to full-scale camp, the Spartans and their new coach, Mel Tucker, who we've talked about extensively on this podcast as well, will be in a sense restarting workouts all over again. So that makes you think, well, this is happening in the preseason, in the off season, should I say. We don't even know how this affects the regular season, if this would even to occur. Like, what's the total number of players / staff members that can test positive without basically having to quarantine the whole team? Where's the cutoff? Where's the percentage line? How do you figure that one out? And that's the muddy area that a lot of people are starting to really put 2 and 2 together. And I keep saying it, every time a week passes by, when we feel like we're getting closer and closer to a season, something else keeps being brought up. More councilmen keep speaking up on this. And it's not easy to just force your way into college football this season without looking at the real consequences of what possibly could happen. So, keep hope alive, but understand there are consequences to this sort of stuff. And this may end up backfiring. It's not a perfect scenario. It's not a perfect plan. But we're going to take our first break, and then we're going to come back talking about what the U.S. Senators talked about with the NCAA earlier this week.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we're back with GSMC College Football Podcast. And previously we're talking about contact tracing, and Michigan State and Rutgers have been quarantined for 14 days as their entire programs were put on shutdown. Now we're getting into the NCAA and U.S. Senators duking it out, of course, in another Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on last Wednesday. So during the hearing, I should say, lawmakers demanded the NCAA develop full-scale reform for their college athletics, even requesting President Mark Emmert present Congress with a more broad set of modifications to the organization's archaic policies. So more than any senator, Cory Booker, who is the Democratic senator of New Jersey, scolded Emmert and the NCAA for not enforcing proper health and safety standards and for not seeing that athletes are graduating, even using their own time as a tight end at Stanford to lambast the NCAA leader. So this is coming from Booker. The time has come for substantive reforms. And he said that the NCAA has failed generations of young men and women, even when it comes to the most basic responsibility, keeping the athletes under their charge safe and healthy. So the third Senate hearing on the raging debate over athlete compensation resulted in little news and a lot of fireworks as two Democratic lawmakers, Booker and Senator Richard Blumenthal, who is the Democratic senator of Connecticut, chastised Emmert for mainly the NCAA's lack of universal and long-term health care for athletes. This has been a building up for months, and the NCAA first requested help from Congress on the name, image, and likeness bill in December, like we talked about way back when, seems like a long, long time ago, but they were seeking a federal uniform standard that will preempt differing state NIL laws, because the biggest thing is that different states are making their own name, image, and likeness laws, and the NCAA does not want to have a lack of control and also create a weird advantage for certain states that may end up getting more national players going to their programs because they have certain name, image, and likeness laws that other states do not. So the request has triggered interest from lawmakers in other NCAA matters, and they've unearthed concerns now using the NCAA's name, image, and likeness request to strike more reform. So the senator questions reveal the NCAA president's stances on some hot button issues, and the president acknowledged that he supports what is called scholarship for life, where athletes may later return to get their degrees, and he denounced COVID-19 waivers that some schools are requiring athletes to sign before they return to campus, calling them inappropriate, and he made clear his support for a proposal that allows athletes to transfer once losing a year of eligibility. The 2-hour hearing brought into the athlete compensation realm a new player, the Senate Judiciary Committee and its chairman, Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican senator in South Carolina. The previous 2 name, image, and likeness hearings are hosted by Senate Commerce Committee, and where the chairman expects the name, image, and likeness bill to move through later this year. The Judiciary Committee dipped its toes basically in only slightly into the name, image, and likeness waters. Its real concern seems to be something grander, which is full-scale NCAA reform. So this is where the nitty-gritty stuff starts to really get interesting. Graham says the committee is starting a working group to craft a basic rights package for college athletes with a deadline on September 15th. The group appears to be led by Blumenthal and Booker, and who have already partnered on the bill that prevents college programs and college universities from requiring COVID-19 waivers. Booker and Blumenthal, also part of the Commerce Committee, are working with a handful of other lawmakers in creating NIL legislation too, but they want more. So the pandemic has highlighted the need to enact health and safety protections, the lawmakers said, and schools are rushing to bring athletes back to campus, and we are watching a slow motion potential catastrophe, that they say. The hearing wasn't without lighter moments, though. Graham, in fact, was the author of several comments that to college football enthusiasts seem laughable. Rule breaking in both college football and men's basketball is somewhat common knowledge to even the most casual college sports fan. And in his open remarks, Graham noted his concerns within the name, image, and likeness bill resulting in recruiting inducements. So he says we don't want a bidding war for recruits, he said later. He said that the NIL bill would potentially unleash holy hell on young college athletes if you don't have some way of controlling people willing to buy a player to come to a school. At another point during the hearing, while speaking about college coaches' salaries, Graham said very few coaches get paid a lot of money that lose over time. A statement disproven by dozens of fired coaches and their $1 million buyouts. In more serious matters, both Booker and Blumenthal attacked the NCAA Power 5's name, image, and likeness proposal for being too restrictive. Sports Illustrated obtained a copy of the summary for the legislation, which includes a host of restrictions. Athletes cannot sign endorsement deals until they complete their first semester of college. Athletes can be barred by their schools from entering into certain NIL ventures, and all NIL contracts with businesses and agents must be made public. Lawmakers took exception specifically to schools having the authority to prohibit certain types of endorsement deals. The NCAA's own proposal is similar to the Power 5's plan, says Booker. The proposal is too restrictive in that it would prevent college athletes from receiving any endorsement deals from any organization that doesn't have an existing or prospective contract with their institution or with any of their competitors, he said. The NCAA proposal isn't only similarly restrictive, but is actually sunsets after 10 years, effectively blocking individual states from making progress on NIL, only to put us back here in another 10 years. So at one point, a lawmaker suggested that Ermit and the whole NCAA, that they are effectively running out of time. And we all know time is precious and is time to up your game. He asked Ermit to present lawmakers with a broader plan for reform outside of name, image, and likeness, broaden the lens, and that the more intense moments came between Ermit and Booker, and the 51-year-old New Jersey lawmaker released 6 years of frustration from his committee room pulpit, glaring down at a live video feed of Ermit, Booker, and Ermit last spoke 6 years ago at another Senate committee hearing. You just have to make a comment that you've spoken to me, and you have not spoken to me in 6 years since we've last been here, Booker said. You and I have mutual friends. They say very good things about you as a person and as a leader, and I'm opening an invitation to you right now to meet with a group of bipartisan senators so we can start talk through about what your plans to address these things and that are patently unacceptable and put your student athletes in danger. So basically this is a call, maybe this is like a come to Jesus moment sort of thing. He's saying that I know you from other people that know us. I hear you're a great dude, but to be completely honest, this here is not good. It's pathetic. And honestly, this whole conference, this whole committee hearing was just congressmen once again just berating the NCAA, berating the president, lo and behold, for, dragging their feet on a bunch of stuff that should have been dealt with long ago. And now every time the NCAA basically asks for assistance from congressmen and lawmakers, they have to sit here and basically get berated every meeting in order to make some sort of menial levels of progress towards this whole name, image, and likeness bill. And it seems like every week there is a new element being thrown into these hearings that have nothing really to do with name, image, and likeness from a big picture point, but it still all revolves around compensating athletes properly and keeping your kids or keeping, parents' kids and these young players as prepped and ready for what possibly is real life and ready to go, because the NFL is not a guarantee you go to play college football and you get in. It's very tough to get in to play college sports in its own right. And to make it to Division I is very tough. And then to make it to a Power 5 Division I is even tougher. So getting into the NFL, where the elite of the elite make it, and sometimes you make it to the NFL and you don't even see the field. You barely make it to the practice squad. So getting to the NFL and playing at a high level is extremely, extremely hard, and it's only for the elite of the elite players. So, yeah, getting a free education is great, but there are many, many different scenarios and many, many different instances where the NCAA is making hand over fist over these college athletes that see none of this revenue, see none of the backing that they could be getting, none of the guarantees, none of the chances to make money for their name alone while they're at their peak of their popularity, of their power, of their star potential in college, while the NCAA just rakes in money time and time again with the use of these players that see nothing for it. And if they don't make it to the league, really, what do they have? Because a lot of kids, they focus so much on football that they don't have time to focus on a degree that is going to get them somewhere. And you could argue that, hey, they still get, that's their choice. They could have chosen a degree path or something that doesn't revolve around, I don't know, physical therapy or sports science or things like that. Typical athlete degrees that you see a lot of people go get because it still revolves around what they like to do, which is to work out, be physical, work on their body, and it's nothing that necessarily isn't already oversaturated enough by athletes or former athletes. So you'll see a lot of people in sports management degrees, or you'll see a lot of people within nutrition and things like that. I get it, right? We all get it. It's a way to continue to do what you like to do and make it easier on you, so that way it's not a lot of classes that involve large amounts of studying, large amounts of research, large amounts of papers and discussions. We get it. However, the NCAA understands that, or they should understand, I should say, that it's just entirely unrealistic to expect these college athletes to put in as much time they have to put in for being a college athlete into their education, when in reality, they don't really care about, and by they I mean NCAA, they don't really care about the education that you're receiving. They care about the dollars and the revenue that you make. And that's been clear many times. There's been cheating scandals. There have been times where people get paid under the table, and thus nobody in the Division I sports really should be in a situation where their grades are in question. Because at this point, I just have a hard time believing that somebody, a coach or somebody who looks over players for their academic eligibility is going to, drop the ball hard enough to where people start to slip through the cracks and are not eligible to play when they need to play. It's just too hard. It's just, especially at Division I, they're going to do everything, and I mean everything in their power, to make it easier for college athletes to pass their classes in order to play. And why? Because they are the revenue makers. They make the big bucks for the schools and for the universities, and we're seeing it now. If people don't play college football this year, there's going to be some budget cuts that we probably never would have assumed would ever happen, because we never assumed a pandemic would basically handcuff a year of college sports and college athletics and athletics across the board. So it is going to be extremely difficult to get this through, and lawmakers are trying to put the pressure on and any means necessary, and they bring up all different types of stuff in order to put the pressure on getting this name, image, and likeness policies and reform going. But we're going to take another break, and we're going to come back talking more college football here at the GSMC.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, welcome back, college football fans, to the GSMC College Football Podcast. And I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage you all to don't forget to follow us on social media. So our Facebook and our Twitter accounts, GSMC College Football. Please subscribe. Not only subscribe to the podcast, but please follow us on social media. We do talk a lot about football at all times, and we try to stay active on there, and it would be great for you guys to come and interact with us and ask us questions and see what we have going on. We like to make announcements all the time on social media, and it's the best way to keep in touch with what we got going on here at the GSMC College Football Podcast. So please don't forget to follow us at GSMC College Football. All right, so coming back out from the break, we were just talking about many different things evolving around Michigan State and Rutgers being basically on 14-day quarantine. And then we were talking about how the U.S. Senators are demanding a lot more from the NCAA president and NCAA in general about name, image, and likeness. And now we're going to take a trip to the ACC, as some things may be in the workings that may include your favorite Irish Spring Green team of team of the decade. I don't know, team of the world. People love Notre Dame, man. People really, really, really support this team no matter what they put on the field. The Notre Dame fandom is global. It's ridiculous, but Notre Dame may end up having to join ACC for the 2020 season. So in particular model, this was written by Brian Driscoll for the Irish Breakdown for SI. So there have been plenty of talk about Notre Dame and the ACC working together to fill out the 2020 football season. And if Brett McMurphy of Stadium is correct, the top choice of that scheduling model involves the Irish becoming the full ACC member of one season. So Brett McMurphy writes that, or he tweeted out that ACC's top scheduling model is a 10-game plus one non-conference foe. And he said that in this format, if Notre Dame plays 10 ACC teams, it would count in ACC standings. Sources said unknown if Notre Dame could earn ACC's Orange Bowl bid, and this needs ACC presidential approval. So in this model, Notre Dame would do what the rest of the league is doing and play a 10-game conference schedule. The full schedule would also include one non-conference game, which could be Navy, depending on what the ACC decides. There is also rumors that the SEC would work out a deal with the ACC to play non-conference games against each other. That would not necessarily mean Notre Dame plays an ACC play an SEC school. There are 14 SEC schools and there would be 15 ACC teams for 2020 should the Irish join up. That would leave Notre Dame still free to play Navy, and if the ACC allows non-conference games, or Notre Dame could finally give BYU the road game they owe the Cougars. Of course, Notre Dame could also still end up playing an SEC opponent. According to McMurphy for Stadium, Notre Dame's games would count in the conference standings for each team and presumably for the Irish as well. McMurphy said the decision on Notre Dame earning the Orange Bowl bid, of course, which goes to the top team in the league or second best team if the top squad goes to the playoff, has yet to be decided. His tweet also did not include anything about the possibility of Notre Dame being able to play any type of league championship game, assuming that those are still played this season, and based on recent comments made by Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick, it's unknown that Notre Dame would even want to be eligible for such a game. So we need to be able to keep in tune with this, because this is going to be a really, really big time decision that revolves around a whole lot of different players, from the Big Ten to the SEC to the ACC. There's decisions that have to be made sooner rather than later, and we know that we're coming towards the end of July, and the SEC is going to have to figure out what their plan is for the season, and that can include so many different things. So if the SEC decides to do 0 non-conference games, then I would assume that the ACC will have to figure something out on the fly, and all likelihood they would also do no non-conference games, and which would mean the Big Ten would also have to do no non-conference games. And what do you do with Notre Dame if they can't play anybody outside? You'd have to go and start searching for other teams, maybe in outside of the Power Five, so group of 5 teams, or teams that are basically looking for any sort of way to replace what's going on and make some money back. But the problem with that is there's money still allocated. How do you cancel funds on somebody that was already decided that was going to happen during the season? So if Alabama is not going to play some lower tier school and give them money anymore, what happens to that time slot? What happens to that university? So that means the buy-in games or the buy games are going to really have a lasting effect on a lot of these smaller universities, and maybe because we don't know if they're still going to honor the payments. We still don't know how that's going to work. But if they don't, maybe Notre Dame can figure out a way to make quick payments on the fly to some of these lower tier schools, some of these smaller universities, to just have a full schedule if they still want to play non-conference and make that work for them. But I feel like the ACC makes the most sense to include Notre Dame, as they already play half their schedule anyway, and it feels like the right thing to do. But all in all, this is just very interesting to me, and I think a lot of the lower tier, lower group of 5 Division I sports are looking like they are gravitating towards the idea of, if the SEC and the ACC and the Big Ten figure out a way to make at least one non-conference game, they'll probably pump the brakes on thinking about canceling their seasons or postponing it. But if they do 0 non-conference games, a lot of people are speculating that Division I sports are going to see a lot of the lower tiers start looking at spring football season moving towards an actual reality rather than just a last-ditch effort impossibility. And here's why. If you look at spring sports in general from a entertainment standpoint, because we'd have to look at how TV networks work and what actually is on TV, there's nothing. I mean, relative for what a football fan is watching, the NFL is over by spring. Basically, by the end of February, it's done. So if you're looking to move a subset of Division I sports or Division I football to the spring, it's a really good chance that they'd get a lot of play. And it wouldn't be like what the XFL tried to do, because the XFL is something brand new, a new product that you don't really reckon. You may know some players, but basically everybody's new, unheard of. It's a whole new way of team memorabilia, making people famous, making the brand famous. College football, NCAA, people already know the schools, people know the teams, people know who's on them. There's already history there. There's no need to make a whole new way of branding college football. You just put it in the spring. Of course, there's more problems that come with putting it in the spring, as competing with college basketball and competing with NBA and those sort of things, and also baseball when that comes back. But I feel like there's enough room to put in college football, especially when it's not Power 5, because I don't believe Power 5 is going to budge on not moving to spring. I don't believe Power 5 football wants to ever find themselves in the spring unless they completely have no other real choice to do so. They don't want to find themselves in the springtime. However, Group of 5, like we already know that the Ivy League has stopped all fall sports, and they're looking towards spring sports to be able to potentially bring back their fall sports as well and to resume athletics in their league. And we know that places like HBCUs and certain conferences, like we know Morehouse, ended all their fall sports, and maybe they look towards the spring to be able to bring it back. And I think that this trend will start to really circulate amongst the smaller Division I schools. And I don't know about Division II, Division III, because they're already small and they may just find something easier to go through, or maybe they just don't play. And that can be really, really tough, because they, unlike Division I, and we already see Division I funding is already hard enough. Division II is just a whole different beast as far as how much funding do you get from playing different schools. And it's not like you're sitting here getting $1 million to go play Alabama or go play the Citadel. Like, that doesn't come often to a lot of Division II schools across the country. And you have to be basically pretty well known and pretty special to be getting some real bump like that on a yearly basis. So a lot of these guys are going to see some real consequences because of COVID-19. And I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to move it into the spring and into a potential more lucrative situation to salvage the season. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to have 2 seasons worth where we're in spring 2020 or spring 2021, and then we move into fall 2021, and we're just basically playing 2 seasons back to back with no break. I feel like if the spring season is successful, they may end up looking at this as a long-term model for lower tiered Division I or even lower than that football and spring or fall athletics into that aspect, right? And I would just say football for certain, because there's also other fall sports that do fall in line with not playing in the fall for certain Division I, schools, universities, and leagues. But football in general, you have to have large amounts of acclimated time. It's a large team game. You need a lot of coaching staff involved, a lot of training facilities involved, and you need time to be allocated, build a schedule. There's a lot of things that are involved with college football that is just on a grander scale than maybe other sports in general have to deal with. And if the college football Division I atmosphere can move itself into the spring and be successful at the lower levels of Division I think that people will look at that and say, well, why don't we just move the lower levels into spring? And you have yourself kind of an interesting division within Division I. It's like Division, 1.5 in Division I, where Division I will primarily still play fall football, and Division 1.5 or 1.5 will end up playing in the spring, and we'll get basically the full shine of what full Division I would get. And people would pay attention to games because people are football addicts. People will watch football anytime. We watch the XFL purely because we miss football, even though it wasn't the best product on the field. And it was a weird mixture between professional and not professional sports in a weird way. The presentation felt very college-like. The play felt a little bit college-like, but the vibe was trying to imitate and take into account how the NFL does their broadcasts and how they produce content. So college just has to go full college. You can have fun. You can do your college game day. You can do all this, that, and the third, and make a product in the spring. As long as it doesn't potentially hurt players, hurt their chances of getting into the NFL. So that's the one thing that is the caveat, right? The NFL draft is not moving for anybody. And that's especially they're not moving for non-Power 5 players. So that is the difference. And that is the big stopping block. Like, what happens to the draft? Do players get selected in the draft mid-play? Maybe that's something, because, the XFL had a thing where if a player was selected by a team to be signed, their contract could be null and void. They don't have to finish it out, and they can go play in the NFL. Now, I don't know how that works for being drafted. Maybe you still have to finish out your college season, primarily because you are still in the middle of it and you probably are still a junior or a redshirt sophomore, wherever the case may be while it's playing. But if not, let's say they draft somebody who's still in the middle of their season, and the NFL has this clause with the NCAA. They work together and they say, you have to finish out your season, but we allocate a draft pick towards this player and it's secure, basically. And there's some insurance on it. I think that'd be kind of interesting. But we're going to take our last break of the podcast, and we'll be right back here at the GSMC College Football Podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, and we're back with the GSMC College Football Podcast, where we're talking about Notre Dame potentially joining the ACC for this season in 2020. And then earlier we talked about Michigan State, Rutgers. They're on 14-day quarantine. And, of course, we talked about how U.S. Senators are demanding the NCAA to do more. And we're going to end the podcast on a little bit of a rankings note. We're going to be looking at the top 25 running backs returning to college football in 2020. We're not going to get to all of them today, but we'll continue on as the weeks come through. These rankings are provided by Pro Football Focus. Go to their website. They do a lot of great content and have a lot of great things that they've written about over the past few weeks and few months of college football. So without a doubt, here we go. Top 25, we're starting with number 25, Ramondre Stevenson out of Oklahoma. So the junior college transfer Stevenson got a handful of opportunities throughout the 2019 season due to injuries in the backfield, and he had made most of them with 16 runs of 10 plus yards, which was 8 of 20 plus, and on 64 carries. So Stevenson averaged 5.86 yards after the catch per attempt altogether, and it's hard telling what the future holds for Stevenson as he was suspended for their CFP semifinal matchup against LSU, and Kennedy Brooks and Trey Sherman back in Norman, but he's on the field. He's one to watch. Number 24 is Ramon Davis from Temple. So Davis was tasked with a lot in his true freshman season and was victorious as far as rushing goes, being the highest graded freshman in rushing grade, barely edging out Kenneth Walker in his four drops. And his 4 drops knocked him down some, considering that it's the most valuable trait for a running back. Number 23 is, who we just talked about, Kenneth Walker III from Wake Forest. So true freshman running back Walker had to run behind the number 96 run blocking unit in the FBS, but that didn't stop him from having success. He trucked his way through defenders, averaging the 5th most broken tackles per rush, and the highlight of his 2019 campaign come from week 13, where he broke 11 tackles on 17 carries. Number 22 is Gary Brightwell from Arizona. With J.J. Taylor's declaring for the NFL draft when he did, Arizona is left with Brightwell as a likely starter, and he was decent on his limited time on the field, and Brightwell saw 66 carries this year and broke 18 tackles while racking up yards after contact, as 287 of his 390 total rushing yards came from such plays. Next on the list is number 21, which is Wan'Dale Robinson from Nebraska. So the Nebraska freshman Robinson missed time in the latter part of last year, which was unfortunate considering he was the second highest graded running back as a receiver through the first 10 weeks of the season. Robinson also had the second most receiving plays of 15 plus yards in that stretch with 10. There wasn't a whole lot of success in the run game for Robinson, but his receiving gives hope for a bright future as a Cornhusker. Number 20 is John Lovett from Baylor. So Lovett struggled with creating a decent rate of explosive runs in his first 2 years at Baylor, but he came around this year with a 10 plus yard run on nearly 23% of his carries and 8% higher than his previous career high. Number 19 is Journey Brown from Penn State. So with Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders both in the NFL, Brown was given lead duties of the backfield towards the tail end of the 2019 season, and that didn't disappoint. Brown was tank rushing up the middle, averaging 10.1 yards per carry, 7.5 yards after contact, and 0.41 broken tackles on his 37 attempts in between the guards. So that's a really, really good metric because he almost breaks half tackles on 37 attempts. So imagine if he got more than that. Like, that's almost saying that half of 37, which is about what? Let's do some quick maths here. That is about 18 attempts. He will break a tackle. That's pretty impressive. So we'll look out for Journey Brown, Penn State. They've been producing some really, really good running backs of recent. Number 18 is DeMontre Tuggle from Ohio. So Tuggle's split reps in the backfield and impressed in his limited action, averaging 3.92 yards after contact per attempt and picking up 11 touchdowns on his 100 carries. And if someone couldn't get a hand on Tuggle to slow him down out the gate, he was going to explode for a run. 10 of his 11 touchdowns came from when he wasn't contacted until he passed the line of scrimmage, and 5 of those were an explosive run. Next is Bentavious Thompson from UCF. Being the backfield running back of UCF, Thompson far exceeded expectations in 2019 and recorded an elite grade of 91.1. On his 86 carries, Thompson had 18 carries go for 10 or more yards and averaged 4.4 yards before contact, which says a lot about both his offensive line and himself. So as a player, we would have to see just how good he is with a lesser offensive line. But when he does have a good offensive line, clearly we see he can produce. Number 16 is CJ Marabell from Coastal Carolina. So in his first full season as a starter from the Chancellors, Marble did not disappoint by increasing his rushing grade from 71.4 to 81.3 and receiving grade from 52.4 to 76.5. So he saw 42 targets this year and hauled in 38 in just one drop. So he's another guy that might be one of those receiving backs that you need to pay attention to if you are a fan of NFL drafts and things like that. So keep him in your fancy notebooks. Number 15 is Otis Anderson from UCF. So while Bentavious Thompson was used primarily in the run game, it wasn't the same case for Anderson, who picked up 2.24 yards per route run this season, which was 7th most in the NCAA or the FBS. His speed and athleticism has been used all over the field, and rightly so, as he's just flat out hard to catch. Anderson's versatility has made him 23rd among running backs in Pro Football Focus wins above average this season and makes the duo of Thompson and him one of the best entering 2020. Number 14, Michael Carter from North Carolina. So North Carolina runs a scheme with a heavy concentration on run-pass options, and Carter was a pivotal part of that. He finished this year at 20 most valuable running back overall and broke 10th most broken tackles per attempt out of an RPO. So that's a really, really specific stat, but he makes it work for North Carolina. And let's not forget, North Carolina has one of the more pure passing prospects in the league, or in NCAA, I should say. And we got to make sure that he is able to complement that with RPO. Number 13 on the list is Keontae Ingram from Texas. So in his second year as a Longhorn, Ingram improved greatly across the board. His rate of explosive runs jumped 5.5% yards after contact per attempt, increased over half a yard, and he improved his broken tackles per attempt total from 0.2 to 0.27. Number 12 is Isaiah Mitchell from Louisiana. So Mitchell is one of the 2 running backs that on this list to rank among the top 15 at the position in wins above average in both 2018 and 2019. So the Raging Cajuns run scheme is heavily reliant on zone concepts, and on those Mitchell has thrived, picking up a first down or touchdown at the second highest rate at 38.4%. Louisiana's run blocking unit is among the 10 best in the country, but Mitchell brought value to the table with breaking tackles over the 3/4 on his explosive runs, which is pretty insane. Number 11 is Javon Hawkins from Louisville. And Louisville's Hawkins was consistent over the course of the 2019 season and finished 15th in Pro Football Focus grade. Standing at 5'9", Hawkins has a speedster who reportedly once ran a 4.37 40-yard dash. He displays the trait of his consistency on the field and has used it to avoid getting contacted from defenders. And when he isn't contacted behind the line of scrimmage, Hawkins is the third highest graded rushing running back. Not to mention his small frame is incredibly difficult to bring down, producing the 12th most broken tackles in the country at 68. Number 10 on the list is Max Burgowie from Washington State. So while we're sure he was sad to see his head coach, Mike Lynch, leave for the SEC, Burgowie had to be ecstatic to get more carries as they'll no longer be passing the ball over 80% of the time in an air raid offense. Burgowie was obviously used more as a receiver than a rusher for the Cougars over the last 2 years, and what he did there was impressive. He dropped just 4 of his 157 targets while breaking 47 total tackles, and on the rushing side of things, Burgowie took a big step forward in 2019, raising his rushing grade from 70 to 82.5%. Number 9 is Javonte Williams from North Carolina. So Michael Carter got the starts, but Williams was the better running back in 2019 in UNC's RPO offense. So Williams produced the most runs on 10 plus yards with 29 and averaged an impressive 4.5 yards after contact per attempt. Overall, Williams finished this year 11th in wins above average at his position and will likely have an increased role in 2020. So look out for him as well from North Carolina. Number 8 is Trey Sermon from Oklahoma. So Sermon suffered an unfortunate season-ending injury in Week 11 and didn't have much production prior to that. That said, when he was healthy in 2018, Sermon was easily one of the best backs in the FBS. That year, Sermon had an elite Pro Football Focus grade of 90.8 that ranked 5th and a win above average total that was second at his position in the country. His .35 percentage broken tackles forced per attempt in 2018 was third in the NFL backs David Montgomery and Devin Singletary. He'll likely split time with Kennedy Brooks, but regardless of who carries the ball more, Oklahoma is clearly set at the position. And you're seeing a lot of multiple teams, or you're seeing a lot of teams that have multiple backs and feature multiple backs, and that's just the nature of football, especially at the collegiate level where you get so many talented recruits, you can't play them all, but you do have to split some carries sometimes. Not everybody is going to be a carry the ball 20 times per game sort of running back in collegiate sports. Number 7 is Puka Williams Jr. from Kansas. So ever since his performance against Oklahoma in Week 12 of 2018, where he picked up 9 games with 10 plus yards and 15 carries, Williams has been making his name known as one of the top young running backs in college football. The rate of explosiveness seen from Puka since the game hasn't really quite been the same since he had to run behind the 95th best run blocking unit in the FBS this year, but he wasn't going down without a fight with the third most broken tackles per attempt at 37%. So number 6 is Kennedy Brooks from Oklahoma. So Brooks wasn't the go-to running back in Oklahoma until Sermon got hurt, but he has been lighting up defenses since Week 5 of 2018. In 2-year Pro Football Focus rushing grade, Brooks owns the 5th best and has produced 10 most runs of 20 plus yards despite ranking 72nd in carries. Yes, his benefits from being in a spread air raid attack, but he can make guys miss off the edge and pick up yards after contact outside of the tackles better than anybody. And over the last 2 years, running outside the tackles, Brooks ranks first in both Pro Football Focus grade and yards after contact per attempt at 4.8. So that is almost all of your 25. We'll have 5 more later to come, but I'd like to say thank you for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, rate the podcast on whatever platform you choose to listen. And don't forget to follow us on our social media, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please follow us and interact. But for the GSMC College Football Podcast, I'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.